Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. It's a Friday. I hope you're looking forward to your weekend. But before you get to that point, let's talk Celtic. And I'll be doing that with Alan Morrison and Jim Orr. Welcome back to the show, guys. Always love when there's a collision of Jim Orr and Alan Morrison on a Friday afternoon.
A collision?
A collision. Yeah, two worlds colliding, Jim, as one. I don't mean a confrontation. You understand? Let's talk Celtic. I'm going to start off with the big story, which seems to have some legs because, Alan, what we're going to see is the same for every transfer window. There are going to be literally dozens of names linked with Celtic, and you've got to try and figure out the nuggets from, the spin which is put out there by agents and clubs and players, etc. So it looks as though we've found a nugget of information. The source is good. And it looks as though Benjamin Nygren, is what I'm calling him now until I'm corrected, is the real deal. I'm looking at, like everybody else, everything that's open source and available to you. 23-year-old, age profiles, right? Swedish international. The one thing I'm going to ask you, Alan, from what you've seen yourself and what you've seen online, what's his best position? Because I see him listed as a right winger. You look at the actual footage, and he looks like more of a creative number 10 style, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does, and I think he can also play, as an attacking 8 potentially, as well. So, we may be seeing the return of Brendan Rodgers and his love for flexible forwards, which I certainly fondly remember. Timothy Way and even Oliver Burke. I know Oliver Burke is much derided, but he actually had a decent spell at Celtic in the second half of that season, when we really did revitalise the attacking lineup with players that could really play anywhere across the front line. So we might be seeing a return to that, because you're right, there's been a host of players from credible sources. I mean, like you say, there's a lot of chatter. Celtic traditionally do their business very quietly and in the background. But I think when somebody like Anthony Joseph or Stephen Macauan are reporting on something, you can usually believe that there's something substantial behind it, and we seem to be linked with an awful lot of attacking players who look like they can play either as 10s or wingers. And this is all very interesting because it speaks to a number of topics you might want to get into around which wingers are we going to have at the club when the season starts. Which players do we see in the role as striker and support striker? And also, what is the shape of the attacking team going to be? And the reason I phrase it like that is I think the return of Kieran Tierney has a ripple effect throughout the team as far as the whole tactical setup of how the team plays. And it has implications for the makeup of the midfield and therefore also potentially the forward lines as well. So lots of intrigue there, but it's great to see that the club seems to be being very active, and the profile of the players that they're going for, I'm quite enthused about as well in general. And we can maybe get into Nygren in a little bit more detail as well. I can give you some thoughts on that, but I want to hear what Jim says.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing I would look at this stage is, if he's listed as a right winger and he's able to obviously play elsewhere, just like Alan says, Jim, I look at where we are with that position of the field, and I'm looking at who's your first choice. Well, it's Nicholas Coon on form, followed probably by Jamesy Forrest. You've also got Yang. And Jota, when fit, can play on the right, stronger on the left, in my view. But you're now bringing another player in who can play in that position. And as a Celtic supporter, Jim, I automatically think, right, who's out the door? Because I would love to run with Coon and a new signing who improves the starting 11. But we don't tend to do that. It's normally one in because we know somebody else is leaving the building. I'm not being cynical. It's just that's what we tend to do, Jim.
Yeah, it's what we tend to do. I mean, I tend to not get too wound up with all these maybe signings until they've actually signed, because life's too short to speculate on who might come and who might not come. I think to take up Alan's point there about the change in maybe formation of the team, that'd be a good thing to see, because I think that last half of the season there was a bit uninspiring. Summed up with the cup final there, so it'd be good to maybe shake things up and do something different, because although we'll all be dead excited when the season starts, if we end up putting the same team we put to the cup final, there'll be a sense of disappointment, I think. So we want 3 or 4 players to kind of jazz things up, and for them to be starters. We've signed too many players in the past who haven't been starters, and we end up, the team we've got just now, most of them are Ange's players. So yeah, I mean, I haven't spent any time at all on who might not sign. I'm enjoying the summer because there's no football, no World Cup, no Euros, so no distractions. Because once we start in August, that's us on that treadmill again, and 10 months of madness. So it's actually quite good to have this kind of calmness at the moment.
Stephen McManus spoke about this yesterday, actually. There was a press conference up at Celtic Park. Chris Macauan went along. Stephen McManus and Shay Given were both in attendance, and Chris done a grand old job. We'll be sharing the clips across the socials over the weekend. We've started doing that already, and that's exactly what he said, Jim. Stephen McManus. He said that, you're in for 10 months of absolute intensity as a footballer, anybody that's involved in the football club. So when you get that wee window of opportunity to relax and switch off and everything else, they tend to do it.
Alan, then what you have yesterday, sorry to butt in again, then you have a picture of Steve McManus and Shay Given with a cup that's of no value at all in a game that most Celtic fans are interested in going to. So
which cup? Which cup? The Adidas Cup?
I don't know. They had a cup. Is that what it's called? They had a cup. And you're thinking, nobody's interested in this. You're pushing it again.
But Jim, it's more important than the best pitch of the season, surely. It's above pitch of the season. Yeah, I would say so.
Mean, this isn't a rant because it's too early for a rant, but, just McManus and Given holding a cup that's of no value for a game that is not of anyone's interest. Well, what's the point?
Well, interestingly enough, on the back of this, we all got an email this morning from Celtic, and it was to promote the content that they captured yesterday. So I'm always interested with these things, Jim, to see how they're going. I did the same with Martin O'Neill's gig last week, and I clicked on the ticket link to see. And at the moment, there are very few tickets available. Now, I don't know if this is because they're going to be released in stages, but when I went in this morning, most of the stadium was greyed out. You couldn't buy tickets. Mm-hmm. So it seems to have gathered a bit of interest. And I was hearing again yesterday that the Newcastle allocation has completely sold out. So certainly...
I mean, it's a good opportunity for people who don't normally go to the games to go to the games, take their kids along. It's the summer. Accessible. They're charging £25. It's a glorified kickabout. Charge a tenner for adults, a fiver for kids, fill the place out. Just give something back. It's all take.
Well, how about on a season ticket? Somebody shared a picture last week on X. I'm just getting into the habit of calling it X about a year after it changed its name. And it was that game, and I forget the name of the game, but Celtic used to play it in the kind of 50s and 60s where it was a group of what they thought was the kind of first team, first 11 against the hopefuls, the guys that were on the fringes and reserves. And often what they would do is they would maybe play a few trialists to see if they could maybe get a contract. And the reason it was shared on the socials was we had been speaking about Gil Scott-Heron, and it was a fantastic picture of him. And he's wearing that beautiful Shamrock jersey, Jim, the one that is much sought after now. For some reason, we've never recreated it. Green collar, big shamrock on it. And it's in one of these A versus B games where obviously one team is wearing the home jersey, one is wearing the away. But the one thing that struck me, as much as Gil Scott-Heron wearing that beautiful jersey, was a crowd. It was absolutely rammed. And it was it was a nothing game. It was a glorified bounce match, Alan. But back then, and without social media, without all these communicative devices that we have now, they were able to ram Celtic Park out. So I get what Jim's saying. It's something I've touched on as well. I think a wee bit more value on the season ticket would be nice. But the flip side of that, Alan, if it sells out, the club will be saying, oh, it works. We'll just keep doing that.
Well, I agree with some of the sentiments of Jim, but like you say, the sad realities of economics, if they can sell the ground out at £25 a head,
you're talking.
And then on the other hand, we complain about why isn't there more talent on the pitch? I mean, this is what you have to balance when you're running a football club, I guess. But I agree with it. I agree with what Jim is saying at heart, in that you can't just keep taking from supporters. You've got to give something back. I think the erosion of games that were used to be, in addition to the league matches on the season ticket, is a sad development, really. But again, if we're going to, you talked about the matches in the 50s and so forth. I mean, that was a time when football was really seen as a sort of, post-war pick me up for people. It was a way to, it was essentially entertainment. There wasn't a lot of entertainment. This is before most people would have had even any form of TV, never mind color TV. Other way before even any sort of digital age. So people went to football, any football, just as a form of entertainment. Very different days now, I guess. But so the clubs have to build these safe stadiums, and then that means comfortable stadiums, all-seater, corporate, all of that. That's just the way it's gone. We can't unpick that, unfortunately. But they should certainly be giving more back and look for opportunities to do so. But on the other hand, we have to put a Champions League level team on the pitch. That's the reality of it.
We do. We absolutely do. And interestingly enough, in the Paul Tisdale presentation that we managed to get some notes from a few weeks back, they were talking about producing, Alan, Champions League players. So producing them from the academy, ready for our first team, so that obviously when we look at our European endeavours, we can say this guy is ready to step up. I think that's been sadly lacking. I think most of us will agree with that. But one thing that really interested me, again, before we get back on to Benjamin or Benji or Ben, I'm not sure what we'll call him. Steve McMahon has pointed something out that I found pretty interesting as well. And he was talking about his role within the B team, and the entire role of the B team was to get players to a point where Brendan Rodgers can select them for the first team. So he never mentioned the Champions League. And he was talking about the successes of last season. And he name-checked young Macauan and Bonner and Turley having made their debuts. He never mentioned Cummins, who also made his debut, but we probably realise why that is. And obviously within the first-team squad, you've also got Anderson and Summers out over in Mirawaka in Austria. And they've played over 40 games of senior football each, both 20 and 21 years of age, respectively. And you've got Dane Murray in the side. So it's easy for us to say, Alan, we never give youth a chance. But there's half a dozen players. There's half a dozen players in and around the first-team squad who you're probably looking at next season thinking, right, you want more game time in the first team. So as difficult as it is, we are still producing, albeit they're not getting massive amounts of games for the first team at Celtic. The players are there, they're in the first team squad.
Yeah, what I find difficult is, so first of all, in terms of what the club can always do better in this regard, absolutely no doubt about that. And I don't see any real pattern to how these players are being introduced to the first team and how they're being utilised. Throwing 18-year-olds in at Villa Park away in a Champions League game, and then not using them, at home to lower league opposition in the league, chucking on one player for 1 minute and then having another player come on for another minute. And, if you've made up your mind on Jeffrey Schlupp before the end of the season and McCardle's done well, then you don't have him on the bench. None of these things make sense to me in terms of a logical plan to develop and have a way to look at these players consistently over a period of time before you make a decision one way or the other. On the other hand, the club's hands are tied to the extent that Scottish football fails to provide young players with a pathway to first-team football at the highest level. They fail to provide an environment. They fail to support the B team within the league structure ideal. You've got this substandard compromise of playing in the Lowland League, which is too low a level for these players to be playing to, Daniel Cummings scoring 20 goals in the Lowland League. I'm sorry, but that's just not capital that I can understand as being translated to you must play in the first team. It's just too low a level. I think Celtic have tried to be innovative. I think sending 2 lads out to play in the Austrian Bundesliga B is a good move, and certainly a better level than the Lowland League. But I've not heard that these guys who are now 21 and probably got reasonable numbers of minutes behind them at the top level, sorry, at that level. I don't know what the plan is for them to come back, and are they going to be part of the first team squad or not? So that's TBC really. So yes, it sounds like we've given a number of young players some opportunity last season, but to me it was all done in a very unstructured way. But the club is up against it so long as Scottish football fails to provide a development path for all young talent to come through into the first teams of the top clubs.
No, I agree with that. And I like the idea of having a partnership club within the Scottish pyramid. And obviously, we know that as of next season, we will have this partnership with Queen's Park. So I'm looking forward to that. The one player I would mention, Jim, and we did mention him a couple of years back, and I interviewed him, believe it or not, with his dad, and we're keeping that one in the vault for when he turns into Ibrahimovic, is Philip Scorb. Philip Scorb was a young lad who was being chased by a number of clubs all over Britain. His dad, Magic, was over working in Scotland to send money back to his wife, Philip's mother, and their daughter. And the pair of them were so down to earth, it was unbelievable. The dad was a PE teacher. Philip was trained by his father when he wasn't training with his football teams, and he played with Portobello. And he was being chased by everybody. Celtic won the race to his signature. And I was just having a wee look at this morning, on your point, Alan, right? So he's 17. He's playing for the Poland under-17s. I think he was capped at under-15 for Scotland, but he's scored a goal every 2 games for the under-17s at Poland, 10 caps, 5 goals. And then you say, right, so what next for that kid? Because he's now 17. I think when I interviewed him, he was 14 with his dad. 17 years of age. He played 2 games, he made 2 appearances, rather, in the Lowland League last season, 45 minutes, scores a goal, 1 goal in 2 appearances, 1 goal in 45 minutes. But what does he do next season, Alan? This is the thing. Where does he play next season? Because you're thinking, right, he's at a point where youth football's probably not challenging enough for him. The B team isn't good enough for him, but he's not ready for the first team. And this is the massive dilemma, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is the role that Darren Odai. I think Darren is probably leaving to. Well, good for him actually. You know, I think it's to his assistant manager role at Swansea. I think is lined up at some point.
Decent gig.
Yeah. So good for him and in his future career direction. But you know, his role was kind of pathway manager to try and help sort this out. So I guess I don't know how the Queen's Park arrangement is going to work. On the face of it, I'm a bit nervous because Queen's Park looked to be in an absolute disarray as a football club. So is that really the best environment for young Celtic players to be going, especially if they're going to be fighting? I mean, that Championship is a terrific division in terms of just the quality of the teams that are in it, and every game's a battle, etc. And if you're fighting relegation, you don't tend to throw young players into that. So we'll see how that works out. But I suppose that's the most obvious answer to that question. But it's a kind of manufactured kind of solution to that. You know, ideally you'd want some kind of reserve league or some kind of level that they could play where they're testing themselves against, you know, fully developed players and players of a reasonable standard as well. So it's either that or he gets loaned out. But if he's loaned out as a 17-year-old, who's going to, you know, which professional team's going to play him? You'd have to pick that loan arrangement very carefully, really, wouldn't you? So
You would.
It's not great. Yeah.
Because I think when you loan a player out, it's important to get the club right, because it's about the mentality as well, isn't it, of that club, the style that they're going to be playing.
Style of play, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because they just disappear sometimes. And there's a guy that playing with Celtic will be very, very prolific. If he goes somewhere else, he might just disappear. So it's a very difficult one. And we've always been banging on about the Reserve League, of course, and a player who played in the Reserve League was indeed Shay Given. Jim, I'm going to come over to you because I've told you my theory before. Shay Given could have been the difference maker for Tommy Burns during Tommy's stay at Celtic. I don't think Tommy had a fantastic goalkeeper at his disposal during his time at the football club. Pat Bonner had been freed by Lou McCarry, as had Charlie Nicholas. Tommy Burns came back to the football club and recalled him, gave them another year. He needed the experience. And Pat Bonner, we asked him last December, we asked him about this, and he said that, you know, Pat had worked obviously with Shay Given. He says to Tommy Burns, the first thing you're going to have to do is sign this kid. He's obviously been freed, and he's been spoken to by a number of clubs down south. So Tommy and Pat went to his house, tried to convince Shay Given to come back because he had been freed by Celtic at this point. But unfortunately, he'd already spoken to Blackburn Rovers, and the rest, as they say, is history, Jim. Chris asked a brilliant question yesterday, actually, at the presser, whether or not Shay Given ever looked back, even though he had a tremendous career, lads. Did he ever look back and think, what if? And he said he did, and he told that wee story. You were probably at the game, Jim, or I don't know if it was during your boycott years, where, was it the 4-2 game, New Year's game?
Yeah.
So you weren't responsible for throwing
no pies, no Mars bars.
at the board, right? He was on the bench that day, 17-year-old Shay Given, and he spoke about that as well. But yeah, that's my theory, Jim. Tommy Burns, if you had that goalie, we'd have won the league.
If we had a Shay Given, 25-year-old Shay Given, maybe, but he was only 17 at the time, so I'm not so sure he'd have.
But that first season, that Hampden season, he broke into Blackburn's first team.
Yeah, well, if buts and maybes, what have you. So, yeah, I love all these sliding door moments. Who knows? There's a few things. I mean, Tommy Burns' team could have been doing a wee bit better. Goalkeeping was certainly one, but one or two other things that played brilliant football. But just anyway, that's a long time ago. Who knows what could have happened? Before leaving the subject, I agree with Alan about that B team league. It's a complete waste of time. We need someone else. Go back to Shay Given. Yeah, who knows?
On that note, though, I'm trying to remember who the guest was, but we were interviewing, it might have been Peter Braun a few weeks ago for This Is Acsom, and we had a film crew actually in the room who are filming a Tommy Burns documentary. And we spoke about, in fact, you know who it was? It was Frank McAvenny, because we spoke about Tommy Burns on the day. Obviously, Frank had some great memories of Tommy. And the film crew were hoping to speak to punters like you and I, normal Celtic supporters, who had a story about Tommy, because they're trying to compile these stories that even the family don't know about Tommy Burns, things that Tommy did behind the scenes, under the radar, that really, really helped people out. And I've spoken to certain people that have gone as far to say, you know, if it wasn't for Tommy Burns, I wouldn't be here. If you were positively affected by Tommy Burns, the late great man, then get in touch with us and we will pass your details onto this documentary team, because they would like to speak to you so they can share your stories in this new Tommy Burns feature-length documentary. You can contact us on the DM. You can email me directly at pauldykes@gmail.com. I only have 6,500 unread emails, which I screenshotted and showed the lads, but I will get round to it. It's one of the ones, going back to Tommy Burns, that we were speaking to Charlie Mulgrew, Alan, right? And it was this kind of change from old school youth development to the academy youth development. And somebody had gone into Tommy's office and he's sitting in front of his computer, and there was like the same amount of unread emails in his inbox. And the person was astonished. He was like, Tommy, you've got to get back to his. He said, look, if they need me, they'll phone me. And that was his attitude, right? If they need me, they will phone me. I love Tommy's attitude. So get in touch if you want to talk. Tommy and the documentary team will come back to you. But before we move on, Alan, I do want to focus a wee bit more on Benjamin Nygren, because I think that it is something that's happened. You look at the sources, you've named a couple that you trust in the Scottish game of football. If they start talking about a player being close to signing, you believe it. What does it mean if we're talking about him as a right-sided, predominantly right-sided winger? What does it mean for the rest of the troops? Can you see this opening the door for one of them leaving? Is Forrest got another season in him? What does the future hold for Jan? What's your take on that area of the park?
So I think, the wing situation is interesting, as is, do we move to a more out and out number 10 with Tierney playing? Because if we're going to play, this is all related, I think. Let's just take the wingers first. I think we could be in a situation where we need wide players. That's why we seem to be linked with a lot of players at the moment. I wouldn't be surprised if out of all that and the ones that we don't know about, we might pick up a couple, if not more, and certainly one or two that can maybe play a more attacking midfield role as well. Because on the wing side, look, we're not going to see Jota until, not this year, right? It's just not going to happen. So I don't know what Rodgers' long-term thinking is on Maeda. I mean, to me, he's the best striker at the club, and he's a top-class striker, and that's where he should play. But I don't know. I don't think Rodgers maybe sees it that way. On the right-hand side, whilst it makes sense from to go back to Rodgers' phase of kind of asset value. It makes sense for Maeda on the back of the season that he's had and the age at 27. That this is the optimal time probably for him, the club, for him to leave. But I've not heard anything that suggests that he will. Whereas with Coon, lots of rumblings that perhaps he does want to leave. So if Coon leaves, as you say, we've got Forrest, another year older. We saw with Forrest this season, he's still got plenty to give to the team. He's got plenty of quality to add, but can't expect him to play 90 minutes very often. You can't expect him to dominate games the way he has. He's more of an impact sub, I would say, and more of a player to fill out the squad in a very positive way, add quality depth to it, not a genuine first starter 90 minutes every game. And then Yang, bless him, seems like a wonderful kid, done everything he can to improve, think he has improved. But, as we saw in the cup final, when it really mattered, the quality just isn't there. So I think, if Coon leaves, if we perhaps discount Yang, if we haven't got Jota for at least the next 6 months, if not more, suddenly it starts to look very thin on the wing position. So that's why I think we're looking at a number of players in that position. And then you've got to think, well, if we have Tierney in the team and Johnston, and Tierney's never really played as an inverted fullback, never played the role that Taylor has played. In fact, Arteta didn't play him for Arsenal because he deemed that he couldn't play that role, which is what he wanted his left fullback to do. So he's more of a traditional up and down the line fullback. We've got one of those on the other side, Alistair Johnston. He can play inverted. He's functional at it, but he didn't quite have the same skill set in terms of picking up space and positions that Greg Taylor could. So your best use of Johnson is also as an up and down supporter of the winger. That means then that you're back to inverting wingers and you're back to overlapping fullbacks. Then if you do that, that leaves and you continue with having Callum McGregor and 2 number 8s whose job it is to crash the box. You're suddenly very exposed on transition at that point. Yeah. McGregor then has a whole lot of space to cover. And I just don't think that's realistic. He's getting older. You have to accept that he can't cover as much ground as he used to. So you either completely change shape, or you 2 options as I see it is you do what Rodgers did the first time he was here. You shift Johnson in one, and he doesn't do that overlapping bombing fullback role. He kind of plays the Lustig role of becoming the third centre back, and then you have 4 players screening for transition in defence when we've got the ball. I don't like that option. I think you lose a lot of energy and intelligence in attack with Johnson doing that. Or secondly, and to me more likely, is that you let the fullbacks bomb on, but then one of the midfielders has to drop back and support McGregor. So you've got 4 players screening the centre of the pitch in the event that Celtic lose the ball in the attacking third, and therefore defend against the counter attack. Now I think we've got players that can play that role. Probably Paulo Bernardo being primary of the ones that we've got. Yeah. So there are some options there, but then that means you've probably then got a more of a number 10. Now we don't really have a number 10 in the squad at all, and a lot of the players that we're being linked with now, especially Nygren, could play that role. So those I think are the options. Those I think are some of the impacts, and that's why I think we're looking at Nygren. The other implication of it, I think, is just teaching us really about quite a few people have commented to me, well, what is Paul Tilsdale doing, sort of thing. Whilst on the one hand, he's not a public-facing role in the team. He's not like the manager that sits in a press conference every week. We don't expect him to be talking to the fans every day of the week, saying, who are you looking at, what you're doing. On the other hand, it had been a little bit quiet, but now we're seeing a flurry of activity. And what's interesting is, we're looking at young players, but not terribly young players. And the way I would characterize this is, that market, and you touched on this a little bit with the lad that you talked about, the 17-year-old Polish kid. We know we've seen young players like Cummins, like Morrison, Hepburn, others who have been plucked from Celtic before they were anywhere near the first team, because that age range from 16 to 18, 19 is a massively over-scouted age range now globally. You can go into Y-Scout and watch players play in Premier League 2 and B team football. It's ridiculous. There's nothing, there's no barriers to getting data and information about players that are nowhere near the first team, and therefore, so these clubs, especially the super clubs and clubs in top leagues, because they want to have a cadre of players that are very well paid at the top of their game, because of UEFA FSR constraints on wage cost ratios, they need to backfill that with a lot of young players who are not on big wages. So they stockpile a lot of young players. That makes it very challenging for clubs like Celtic who can't offer their young players an alternative to that. So that young age group, that very young age group, teenage age group, is massively over-scouted, and it's very difficult to pick up value in that age range. I mean, teenagers going for a lot of money, being offered huge contracts at big clubs, etc. So for me, when you're looking at transfers, it should be about finding value, and you can find value at any age point. I mean, I would argue, Casper Michael to me is great value. He's 38 years old. So you can find value at any age point, any price point. And smart recruitment finds value. It's not just about, we're going to buy lots of young players and sell them for a lot of money. It's about where's the value. So somebody like Nygren, for example, coming to the end of his contract, looks to be potentially a fee of around £2 million, just brokered into the Swedish national team. Looks tremendous value to me. He's 23 years old. That's old for a developing player. It's these days we come up against teams in the Champions League that will have a number of players who are 19, 20. Look at PSG. They had like five players that played in that Champions League final that were of that age group. So it doesn't. We can't just chase that market. We have to look for value. And I think Nygren is a player who left Scandinavia, went to Belgium. Belgium's a tremendous shop window for players to play in. It's a competitive league, lots of decent clubs, and because they can import players from all around the world, seemingly, especially African players, it's a real melting pot of skills and cultures and abilities. And as you know, there's teams all around the world have had players from the Belgian league. He's went to the Belgian league. It's not worked out for him. He's gone back to Scandinavia, and it's almost like the sort of. I think that that to me again, it's about sometimes players' development is not linear, and sometimes there's value in players that have had a big move. It's not worked out, but then they suddenly develop again, and this may be the case with this Nygren lad. So I'm encouraged by the names we've been linked to. We are looking at players in that younger bracket, but we're also looking at value and maybe players that are 22, 23, who've maybe had a move, it's not worked out, they've gone back, they've developed again, and there's value in those sorts of signings.
I absolutely agree with you. I think there's actually shades, and I'm not comparing them as players as such, but there's shades of the Nicholas Coon deal. Not just the value in terms of the transfer fee, but a player who had moves that didn't really work out, Alan. And had they worked out, we wouldn't have got near him. We wouldn't have got near him if it had worked out at his previous clubs. But then it takes a certain manager who, I think Brendan Rodgers is that type of manager, who's able to bring a player under his wing, develop them, coax them back to full fitness, sharpness and confidence, and then you start seeing the performances. Though I'm not going to say the one cautionary tale, but another cautionary tale is a name that you've mentioned, Barry Hepburn, without a club now for almost a year, since being released by Bayern Munich. And you look at that and think, that's so sad for a 21-year-old, coming through the Celtic ranks, Bayern Munich sign you. You go over to Germany, what an incredible opportunity that is. And then the career, for whatever reason, just absolutely hits a brick wall. And I hate seeing that with young kids. And I hope that Barry Hepburn gets another club and starts to rebuild his confidence in his career. Jim Orr, I was at the Pavilion last week. It was, in fact, earlier this week it was. And it was the first time I was in there since I went to watch one of your shows. So I'm sitting in that beautiful theatre thinking to myself, yeah, Jim did well. Jim sells this place out. What are you up to at the moment when it comes to theatres and writing and all your creative endeavours?
I'm fairly quiet. I've got one planned for maybe a couple of years' time, which I'm going to start on, and maybe trying to bring history back sometime next year to a bigger venue. So that's quite quiet. Again, like the football, I'm just kind of enjoying not doing too much these days. But to get back to something Alan talked about what the manager's plans are for next season, what kind of formation we're going to play. I thought things got a bit tired, as I said, towards the end of the season. And I would like to shake things up. I would like to see a different formation. And the two teams I liked over the past maybe 2 or 3 years that came to Celtic Park were Bodo Glimt and Club Brugge. I liked the way they played. I liked their formation. 3 big centre backs, all dead comfortable in the ball. And the unfortunate experience about Hampden last week watching Iceland. And there's Iceland, tiny wee team, teaching us how to play football. Modern, not about football. So I'd like to see that. I'd like to see that kind of difference next year. And also the fact that football's a cutthroat business. Talking about the lad Hepburn, there's hundreds of stories like that. That's just the way things happen. I always think any football team, you're looking to replace every single player that you have. So the fact that Cameron Carter-Vickers is a good player, could we get somebody better? Yeah, we could. So we should. And that's what I'd like to see. I'd like to see the go that 3-5-2. I'd love to play 2 people up front for a change. I don't think the manager will do that, but that's what I'd like to see. As a fan, I'd like to see that, because I think a lot of games last season were kind of a hard watch. That kind of passing stuff. So, but I think like domestic football, there's no reason why we shouldn't play 2 people up front. Go for it. I know that looks a bit dinosaurish, whatever, but from my personal point of view, I'd like to see something different players coming in, because we're always trying to shoehorn people to do things. Well, we could play Bernardo in this, and we could play Tierney. We could no, just bring in different people, good people to fit those positions. And if the guys up there aren't working, we need to get rid of them. Yang's a lovely guy, good player. Is he good enough? No, really. So why is he still there? We need to get rid of and get somebody better in. So I think there's a lot of things we need to change.
It's interesting, Jim, where you're talking about 2 up top, and you say that at the very mention of that, you're called a dinosaur. I find for that very reason, you should try it, because it's unexpected. People aren't used to playing against 2 up top. Why not try it? As you say, there's so many games domestically where we get to a point where we're comfortable in the game. We're not going to lose the game. Try it then. Try it for half an hour. Try it for a half, where the game is more or less won. It's put to bed, and then you can try something a wee bit different. Get the team.
I just like to see us go a bit more direct. That's all. A bit more direct in games. I just think I understand the passing philosophy, and we'll create holes and create spaces, and we'll take advantage of that. But a lot of the times, I'm not saying it's a hard watch, but it's not a great watch. Particularly domestically, we're playing Falkirk and Livingston next year, and we need someone to jazz things up.
Jazz
plastic
up.
pitches.
I know.
4 games against the same teams. We need something different, and that's what's so good about Ange's team. I know people don't like the big man, but it's so.
I love the big man.
You're looking forward to the games. You knew it was going to be dead exciting. It was going to be score goals for fun. It was really exciting stuff. It'd be good to get back to that. As a fan, I'd like to get back to that.
Yeah.
Not saying Ange to come back, but just that style of football, that gung ho, let's go for it. Whereas that shoehorn playing along the back and 4 people at the back passing to each other, do something different next season.
It would be certainly in spells. I totally agree with that. I'm going to bring in some of these comments before we move on to other matters, and I'm starting off with Joe Hamilton. Always a pleasure to see you on the YouTube, Joe. And in your avatar, you are there with your guitar. You're a musician. Let us know where we can find out your stuff as well. Afternoon Troops, Liam's latest blog, an absolute must read as the Clockwork Orange keeps rolling in our direction. One of my favourite movies, that, by the way. You'll find that on my shelf somewhere behind me. Clockwork Orange. Go and check out Liam's blog. The link is underneath this video. He's doing a grand job there. John Thompson, a famous name in the world of Celtic and in Fife, indeed. Visiting Glasgow from Canada. Usually don't get to listen live. Love the show, guys. Love the work you do. Keep it up. Hail, hail. It's just a shame, John, that we don't have a live event this weekend, or we could have met up with you as well. Enjoy your time in Scotland. Monty will believe it when the player has signed. Listen, yes. I'll tell you something. Even when a player is paraded in the jersey, they've not always signed, have they, Monty? I don't think we'd fall for that again. Jungle Lion mentions Evan Ferguson. He just needs the right club. He's been struggling for 2 years now. We will move on to that. I don't know if this is on the same end of the scale, Alan, as the story that's broken and obviously been rubber stamped, if you like, by Anthony Joseph. What do you make of Ferguson? Because obviously we'd probably be looking at a loan deal for the kid. He's 20 years of age. I tend to agree with Jungle Lion here. He's somebody that just needs to get into a rhythm, a groove, get game time, have a team and a manager that believes in him and start building his confidence again, because this was a guy a couple of years ago that was the next big thing.
So I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about him. So before I get into something I don't know a lot about, just want to touch on this idea of formation and shape, right? Because if you actually look at how Celtic actually play, what formation do you think they play with the ball, right? When Celtic attack, essentially, it's a 2-2-6. Right? That's what it is. They attack with 6 players. They defend with roughly a box 4 in the middle, right? So they're attacking with 6 players. Why would you have 2 players in the middle who don't do anything to help you create? You've actually got 6 players there who are all trying to create, maybe with one out-and-out striker. So to me, to move from 3 out-and-out forwards to 2 is reducing your attacking options, actually. And that's why most people don't do that, and why, and also because you'll basically get outnumbered in midfield. The second thing is, formations are actually more important when you don't have the ball. And what formation does Celtic play when they don't have the ball? Guess what? 4-4-2. When Celtic out of possession play 4-4-2. So they do play 4-4-2, but without the ball. With the ball, they try and get 6 players forward. I'd rather have that than have 2 strikers sort of lolling around in the box not doing much. But that's my take on that. But
Can I
in terms of
ask, Ellen, have
yeah,
we seen the last days of the strike partnership? Let's just say. I mean, listen, non-Celtic related. We were talking earlier about Steve Bull and Andy Much at Wolves. You know, the strike partnership, the Sutton and Shearer down in Blackburn. Have we seen are those days completely gone in your view?
I think they have, because it comes down to controlling space, controlling the ball is as a priority. I take Jim's point about directness, but actually, in many ways, and this again might seem counterintuitive to people, but Celtic are a far more aggressive, out of possession pressing team under Rodgers than they were under Postecoglou. So in that regard, they are more aggressive. Now, they are less vertical in terms of attacking. There is more control, but you think about it in terms of what is the best way to play against the vast majority of teams in Scotland. If we play very directly, direct implies taking more risk with your passing, more longer passes, more quicker passes forward, which makes sense in Europe against good defences that are a bit higher, not bunkered in. Doesn't make a lot of sense against 10 people parked along the edge of the box. But if you play that way, what's going to happen? You're going to have more throw-ins, more goal kicks. We're going to see what we saw against St Mirren, where the goalkeeper has the ball for 20 minutes. So it makes sense for Celtic to play that way, to control the ball and to control the space. I know it can be a bit sterile sometimes, and that's where you need the right players. And the problem we've had is we went through a phase of not having the right wingers, and then we went through a phase of not having the right midfielders. With Hatate injured and Jota injured, that creativity deficit came into sharp relief in the last couple of games of the season. That's the issue, more than the approach to how to break down these teams. Because if we do try and play more directly, you're just going to see more of the ball out of play. You're going to see more of time wasting, taking throw-ins, and all of that. So controlling the space, controlling the ball, kind of makes sense in the league that we play, given how the other teams set up.
That's interesting that we're at that stage, Alan. And again, you've got to modernise the game. You absolutely do have to modernise the game. That old partnership up top, let us know in the comment section in terms of the right wing position. If we do sign Nygren, and it looks likely, I want you to tell me, who do you keep, who do you bench, and who do you sell? And I'm talking here about James Forrest, Nicholas Coon and Yang. Who do you keep, who do you sell, and who is your backup? Let us know in the comment section. Jim, we've seen the last day of the striking partnership. How does that make you feel? Does it make you feel old?
No, I mean, the more goal scorers you get on the park, the better, as far as I'm concerned. If two guys who can score 20 goals a season and they're both on the park at the same time, I get the tactical stuff. If Maeda and Ida are on the park, or if it's Kyogo and Ida are on the park at the same time and we're creating chances, then they're more likely to put the ball in the net rather than the other guys who are there. And I get that, and I get that we don't tend to take shots. We don't tend to take risks. We're like a very kind of risk-averse team. We keep the ball and we move it around. It's very chess-like to try and open things up. And yeah, it's not the most entertaining thing in the world. And I get the point that, maybe domestically will give us better outcomes to play with the playing. But maybe dinosaur-ish. That I always like to see two strikers on the park because there's a better chance of scoring some goals in my simple mind.
My simple mind. Alan, I'm going to ask you about a couple of midfielders later on before we wrap up in their debut seasons for Celtic. In actual fact, Luke Macauan and Arnie Engels, how you think they've fared as well. But before I do that, I'm going to run through some of these comments coming through. You and Boy Martin, I will be seeing you next week on the 20th, 1 week today in Belfast, where we will be joined by Chris Sutton. And if it wasn't for Paddy Lavery, this wouldn't be happening. This Benjamin Nygren excites me, a player who will definitely improve the team. I agree with that. We've also got Duck Soup. I'd love to say the board will match the fans' ambition, but they'll be tight again. Incomings will depend on money coming in first, which means selling a top player, but my opinion only. well, history tells you that will be the case, Ducksoup. We have discussed over the last few weeks that every now and again in that cycle, there might be a summer where that's not the best for us. And we go out and we get the players that we need and we retain the best talent. However, I share your thoughts. I do think we'll lose at least one of the top players. Barry O'Sullivan, it feels like we're about to get the ball rolling on movement of players. Looking forward to see what this window brings us. Hail, definitely. So the Evan Ferguson chat, basically, Alan, young kid, comes over from Ireland, full international cap. He's now 20. Last couple of seasons hasn't had the game time, and with that hasn't really had the performances that he had shown in his younger years. Last season, for example, 23 games played, 1 goal, only 541 minutes under his belt. So he's the classic example of a player that needs rebuilt. And I think, Jungle Lion's been talking about him for a long time. He's been on the radar for a very long time, played with Bohemian over in Ireland. Is that the type of player that we could bring in and revitalise, do you think? I think, if a deal could be struck, Brendan Rodgers is ideal for that type of situation.
Yeah, I don't know why. I mean, that sounds like a scenario that you could apply to any number of 20-year-olds across any number of leagues, in all honesty. I don't know what it is about Evan Ferguson that might be better or different. I mean, why is he not playing for Brighton? Is it ability? Is it attitude? Is it fitness? Is it a combination? I don't know. If he's been at Brighton for a number of years, I suspect he's on bloody good wages and therefore would probably be quite expensive for a 20-year-old as well. So I don't know. I honestly know nothing about the player. I'm just these are just the immediate thoughts that are in my head. And also, does he fit the style of play? Is he the sort of striker that would fit into the way that Celtic play? Question mark. I don't know. So these are all the thoughts that I would apply to this situation. But this is what scouting's about. It's not starting off with a player's name and working backwards. It's starting off with a set of capabilities and competencies and saying, right, which player best fits those and where are they? And are they at the price point that we're prepared to pay for that player?
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean,
I'm not a big fan of this revitalising players. I don't think that's what we should be about. I think we should be. The young Swedish guy sounds like a kind of good option to me. He's in the Sweden national team. He's pretty hot just now. 1 year left in his contract. He's playing all the time. That's the kind of guys you go and sign, not somebody who's hardly kicked a ball and on silly wages. To me, that's a kind of retrograde step.
Yeah. Again, Jim, because of Brendan's record, I think that's why it's one of the ones I always keep an eye on, because we wouldn't get near Evan Ferguson otherwise, if he was scoring goals for Brighton. You look at his cap record, sensational cap record, 20 years of age, Jim. I know you're a big Scotland fan, and he's got 22 caps under his belt. And I was mentioning earlier on this week that we've got a few. We've actually got 3 players heading for 100 caps for Scotland. The 3 I mentioned was Billy Gilmour, sensational, 40 caps at 23. Andy Robertson and John McGinn, they're just always there, and they're heading towards that kind of 100 mark as well. But Jim, all is not well with Scotland. What's the big issues? Is it obvious? Is we don't have a goalie or a striker? Is it that obvious for you as a Scotland fan?
Don't have a goalie, don't have a defence, don't have an attack. Apart from that, it's perfect. It's
good midfield.
And the manager, you have to question the manager as well. Apart from that, it's fine. Yeah, we've got all these really good, talented midfield players, and I don't think there's a talent coming through. I think people talk about there's a lot of talent coming through. I don't really see it. That really good cohort of midfield, maybe plus KT, and that's basically. I think we are where we are. 40 odd in the FIFA rankings. I think the performances in the past couple of years have been appalling. I think the manager should go, basically. So, but yeah, I think Scottish football's not in a great place just now. I think the standard of the league is pretty poor. So depressing. Yeah, I think Scottish football has to be better. We have to have better people leading Scottish football as well, which I know that's a bigger issue that we'd like to touch on from time to time. What we do in the game needs to be improved. What we do for youth football needs to be improved. Everything. And I think the national team represents all those feelings to me. As a wee mini rant.
No, not at all, Jim. What do you reckon in your spell watching the Scottish national team? What do you reckon was the best era, the best team that you've seen?
The 80s
86 was good.
Yeah, I mean, there was a time, obviously, as other nations develop and become better and we become worse, then the natural effect is that we'll just slide and slide and slide. I mean, if you go back to the 60s and the 70s, if you're playing a team like Morocco or Senegal, you take 10 goals off them. Whereas now they're better than us. I mean, I think Morocco or something like 12th or 13th in the FIFA rankings, and we're 40 odd. So these countries have developed. They've got a lot better. They've done things that we haven't done. There's Iceland last week. Giving us a lesson. A country the size of Iceland who looked like had technically gifted players, knew what they were doing, could pass the ball about. We just looked like dinosaurs playing against them. So I blame the SFA for most of this stuff. For that slide, not investing in facilities, not investing in coaching, not investing in a whole lot of stuff. I mean, a kind of old-fashioned attitude towards things. Some of that you could accuse the Celtic board of doing, but in terms of the greater national picture, I think we're just slipping and sliding away.
And on that point, one of the guys that obviously is part of that talented midfield is Lennon Miller. He's made his first start for Scotland. So let's talk about midfield for a bit, Alan, because I remember moving into the campaign where Ange Postecoglou's second season, we were going to face teams like Real Madrid. And I remember speaking to you in the pre-season, you said, in terms of the profile of our midfielder, you were really concerned at that stage. And you were talking about the types of teams we would be up against that season. You said, we don't have the players to manage that. We've obviously gone out and we've strengthened since then. We have brought in, and we've been weakened. I mean, let's be honest. Matt O'Reilly leaves the football club. We bring in Arnie Engels. We also bring in Luke Macauan. Where do you think we are in relation to the midfield now? Because that was a big concern for you 2 or 3 seasons ago.
Yeah, well, there's a number of issues, but a sort of lack of athleticism was at the heart of it. And in a sense, we've tried to address it. And actually, if you look at performances in the Champions League, you could argue that having the likes of Bernardo, Engels, even having Hatate playing a bit deeper has helped to kind of strengthen against the ball, which I think is a fair comment. Are Celtic better against the ball than they were when they had more attacking players like O'Reilly and Turnbull and Moy, etc., and Hatate a little bit further forward? You could argue yes, they are, and we've probably not been hugely physically overmatched in midfield, even in the Champions League games to some extent. But on the other hand, I think it's come a creativity cost, because we've and the sort of elephant in the room, if you like, is young Engels, who I think is a really good footballer, a really good guy in terms of attitude, work rate, all of those things that you hope are the sort of bread and butter of a great professional. But he's just a player who's been plucked from the Bundesliga, playing in a team that's generally not going to have the ball very much, playing on a sort of wide rightish kind of role where he's expected to hammer, channel balls down between the centre backs, or the centre back and the full back, and get crosses into the box and shuttle up and down. To Jim's point, in a 4-4-2 often, as Augsburg used to play, or the variants thereof. That isn't how Celtic want or need their attacking eights to play. They want their attacking eights to be good with their back to goal, to be able to link play, to play very intricate short passes on the edge of the box, open up teams in that way. And that doesn't appear to be Engels' game. So I think he's a very good footballer and a very effective footballer, trapped in the wrong team and the wrong style of play. Bernardo, we use Bernardo often when Hatate was injured as the most advanced of the 3 midfielders. Well, Bernardo, if you look at all of his profile, all of his data, and all of that, watch him, he's clearly best as a deep sitting midfielder. So I don't understand why are we pushing him further forward? And guess what? We don't see a lot of goals, assists, and chances created and so forth from him. And then we've got Hatate, who, when we had Moy, O'Reilly, and Turnbull, if you looked at all of the attacking data, Hatate would be ranked 4th out of those 4 in terms of most of the attacking metrics. Now he's clearly the best attacking midfielder that we've got, but that doesn't mean to say that he's massively improved. It means that we've swapped a bit of athleticism and a bit of structure with a reduction in creativity. So I think it's a bit of a mess. Is probably too strong a word, but it's certainly not as functional as I'd like it to be. And I think as I say, the Tierney coming back could be a trigger for sorting this out, where we actually get a proper either sitting midfielder or box-to-box midfielder that supports McGregor, because he can't defend the midfield on his own when we've got the ball. And we have a proper sort of attacking, maybe 10, back to more the style of player that kind of Rodgers was. We haven't really had one since then. But and to Jim's point, have players that actually fit the system and can do the job you want them to do, rather than trying to shoehorn kind of players in, which is what I feel we're in that situation now. So yeah, I think it's still dysfunctional, if I'm being honest. Not dysfunctional to the point of it's broken, but dysfunctional in terms of looking at it through the lens of how can we make the Celtic team as good as it can possibly be.
I think that's the point I was trying to make earlier, only Alan's done it far more intelligently than I could have put it. The fact that if you take Bernardo, I like Bernardo, good player, but I'm not sure where he's meant to be. I'm not sure if the manager knows where he's meant to be. So if you don't really know where he's meant to be, why do we still have him? Just try and sell him, get the money back, and get somebody who you know where he wants to be, and you can play him in that position. So as I said, Alan, far more articulate in putting that together. That's the frustration I find, that we're trying to move people about, square pegs, round holes. Just accept the fact that Bernardo, good player, but really not for us, or Engels, good player, but maybe not for us. And then change it, do something different. Because I think we're just trying to tweak little things about. And from a fan's point of view, it becomes quite frustrating, thinking, well, what's he trying to do here? Whereas people who know what they're doing, and even something like Maeda, is he a left winger, is he a centre forward? Pick one, stick to it.
No, definitely, I think he's a centre forward personally. What about Luke Macauan, Alan? Luke Macauan came in, and I think, for a long time it was all about the supporter playing for the club and all that kind of stuff. But once you get down to the business end of a season, that all goes out the window because you just want to see good performances. How do you think he's fared in his debut season for Celtic?
So, you can't but like Macauan, because he's a risk taker. In fact, I would argue Macauan is actually, in reality, the profile of player that many people think Hatate is, but he isn't. He is actually a chaos merchant, Macauan, and he's best deployed as far forward as you can, whereas Hatate is actually better deeper. His ability to see passes and execute from deeper positions is excellent, and that makes best use of him. If you push him further forward, he tends to get lost in the trees. The Macauan is one that you can push further forward. He's a risk taker. He'll lose the ball a lot. A lot of things won't come off for him, but he can unlock defenses. He can make things happen. The question over him are twofold. One is a physical thing. He tends to my eyes anyway, he doesn't play many 90 minutes. He tends to tire quite badly, early in the second half, and whether that's a natural stamina thing, I don't know. I'm sure he played plenty of 90 minutes for Dundee, but maybe not at the intensity with the ball that Celtic play. So question mark about that. And secondly, is that can his brand of chaos football scale to a Champions League level? Question mark. Again, I'm not sure that it can, but he's certainly somebody who, especially the wages I'm sure he's on, is really a very useful squad player to have. Ticks the Scottish player box as well. And in terms of general play and SPFL level, he's a great lad to have around. I think he's great fun to watch. But yeah, that would be my sort of pluses and minuses, if you like, from his perspective.
Chaos football. I love that. That sounds like the name of a podcast. You brought up Ollie Burke. I didn't, Alan. It was your fault. And I was just looking there because Ollie Burke obviously he's got a great move in him every single step of the way. Every single time he needs a move, he gets a great one. And there's been this massive discussion around Kieran Tierney missing loads of football. He's never going to play 30 games of football for Celtic, etc., etc. And in the last 3 seasons, I don't think you look at Ollie Burke and think, he misses loads of games of football, that Ollie Burke. We always talk about him in terms of his physicality, his athleticism, etc. Ollie Burke in the last 3 seasons has played 86 games of football. Kieran Tierney has played 103, and that includes 20 internationals. So I think a lot has been made of this. Yeah, there was a horrific injury, muscle off the bone injury for Scotland. Lost a lot of football last season as a result of that. But, I'm confident he will play 30 games of football for Celtic next season. We can come back to this and clip it.
Sorry, Paul. Sorry to be very pedantic, but you need to look at the minutes played, not the appearances, because Tierney's been used a lot as a sub this season for us. So he's got over 20 appearances, but I think he's played like barely 700 minutes. So that's the key thing.
But
to look at,
that's not down to him being injured, though, Alan, which is the point. He's not. If he
but
comes on as a sub,
he's had a number of
he's been fit for the game.
He's had a number of injuries over the year, even at Arsenal, hamstring, abductor. These are horrible muscle injuries for footballers. There is a some of it's to do with the style of play. Some of it might be to do with his general kind of physiology, etc. So I think it is undoubtedly, if you look at his injury data, there's no doubt it is a genuine risk. I hope like you, he does play 35 games next season. But I think we have to be prepared as a squad to for the scenario where he doesn't, right? I think that's just sensible risk management.
I think the natural inclination for most football fans is to be negative. Let's be positive. The point I made at the very start of all these signings that we're potentially going to get, we don't know until it actually happens. So let's be positive. He's a fantastic signing, and hopefully everything will go well.
I agree with you, Jim. And again, I think that you're buying in the mentality of the player, and it was touched on yesterday by Steve McManus talking about the importance of having that core group of players who know exactly what it means to play for Celtic. I've enjoyed this. It's always great. By the way, Mickey, you're right, Mickey Moynihan, elite Acsom squad today. He's talking about you two guys. He's not talking about the host. Cell88 says, yes, Jim Orizon, we will get the truth. Can you handle the truth? Can you handle the truth? And BB, we're talking about positivity. I'm ending the show by being positive. He says, brilliant. Friday isn't the same if Jim isn't on Acsom. Lots of love. Lots of love for you there, Jim. You're not having it. You're not taking it. Listen, we are always on the move. We're always doing other things, and we've got live events in the works, as well as one which is almost sold out. If you want to come along and see Brian McClare and also Peter Grant on the stage at Gracie's, there are 38 tickets left. Jim's away to book his now. 38 tickets left. Come along, join in the fun. Alan, you've been at a very early Acsom gig. Hopefully we'll see you again sometime in the future. You can come along and see two of the funniest guys actually on the stage, Peter Grant and Brian McClare. Looking forward to that. Thanks everybody for getting involved. We do have a big announcement coming up for our next event, but I can't let the cat out the bag just yet. But follow us on our socials, like us on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel. And come back at 12:30 on Monday for more of this. It's a Celtic State of Mind. Thank you.